The disclosure projects whose messages have reached over 1 billion people with credible evidence that we are being visited by ET civilizations. And he formed CSETI, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, to, among other things, teach people how to make contact. His endeavors have been very successful. Today, he will share with you the framework for making contact and some of the linear and consciousness techniques that the CSETI teams around the world have used so effectively. Let's give a big warm welcome to Dr. Stephen Greer.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, we got started late, but we're getting started. Welcome, and I'm glad you're here. And we're going to have a couple of hours to go through some amazing information. How many people who are here were not at the talk yesterday? This is a problem, because I'm not going to go back over all that. So the assumption was, because we only have a couple hours, but what I do want to do is I'll do a sort of a really tight encapsulation of it, and not the whole hour and a half, and then we're going to move right into the main point, and that is we want to, all of us, when we leave here today, understand how we can make contact, because the system has failed us, and it's really time for us to take this into our own hands. So for 20 years, we've been teaching people the techniques of remote viewing, higher states of consciousness, and contact. This is something that everyone can do. Contrary to what you may think, it isn't difficult. And people have found that if they learn a few basic things, they can make contact, peaceful contact with these interstellar civilizations. And the reason they respond is because they want to have contact with humans. And they want to have a point of contact with human beings rather than through the military-industrial complex. So you're much more likely to be able to make contact with these civilizations than Hillary Clinton or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So that's the good news. The bad news is that this whole subject has been hijacked for about 60 years by people who want to frighten folks. And the reason why that has happened is because there's a multi-trillion-dollar interest group, the military-industrial complex, that's very attached to having the next war be interplanetary. We had, of course, Douglas MacArthur on his last speech to the world from the well of the Congress. This is a matter in the congressional record said in the 1960s, World War III will be interplanetary. A very bizarre thing. People said, what in the world is this man talking about? And it was by then that the plans had been put in place that Wernher von Braun, who, of course, as you all know, invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, became the core of our space program in the United States after the OSS put Operation Paperclip in place to bring the brilliant Nazi scientists into the United States, and Wernher von Braun was one of them. And he told his assistant for many years, Carol Rosin, who's one of our top secret disclosure project witnesses, that in fact a plan had been hatched in the 50s to hijack this subject and to put out the disinformation so that the people eventually would accept that there was an enemy in space and that they would attempt to create an interplanetary conflict. So as we drive around LA and we see all these billboards about Invasion LA, and we hear all the speakers at this conference and others talk about the good aliens and the bad aliens and the whole Manichaean worldview, we realize that the indoctrination of the mind of the human species is almost complete. And that's why we're in an emergency. We're in a true emergency, that people have to rise up and be ambassadors to the universe in peace, without prejudice. And I think this is the hardest thing for people to do, because really what we're about to do, and a lot of people don't know this, and I'm not going to start naming names here in terms of people in the UFO and New Age community, but they're really wanting you to trade homophobia and racism and misogyny for interplanetary hatred. And this is why there's this big push to tell people there are these good ETs, which, if you notice, always look like gorgeous Swedish babes, blonde with big boobs and the whole bit, right? And then there are the ones that, you know, the horrible ones who look different and smell different and they're shorter or they have funny noses or this and that. This kind of anthropocentric projection into a interstellar racism is exactly what was hatched in 1953 and was meant by a CIA document that I have in my possession that's talked about engaging Disney Studios to make cartoons and fictional things about flying saucers, to use this subject as an item of psychological warfare, and I'm quoting, psychological warfare and propaganda. And the result has been 50, almost 60 years of very well orchestrated false information that's been put out to the public. Now, a lot of people are listening to this going, does this mean that almost everything I know about this subject is false? And the answer is yes. Here are the things that are true. We are being visited by multiple interplanetary civilizations. They work together. Some of them are 10 to the 6th to 10 to the 7th years more developed than we are, meaning in the hundreds of thousands to millions of years more developed. Others maybe a few thousand years down the path from where we are. None of them are hostile. They are all, however, concerned with our hostility. So I'm going to put up a great big cosmic mirror, and it's like the man in the mirror thing. And imagine that you've been observing Homo sapiens develop over the last few thousand years from tribal to nation state to big nations. And you've seen conflict go from clubs and spears to thermonuclear weapons. And in the classified projects, the scalar weapons. Everybody saw the spiral over Norway? That was a scalar weapon, man-made. That was a shot across the bow to warn President Obama to stay away from this subject because we had just put together the briefing for him. So, unfortunately, we're in a situation where the extraterrestrial civilizations are viewing humanity with both hope and promise and some trepidation, because our technological capabilities have outstripped our social and spiritual development to such a point that we now can not only destroy all life on Earth, we can destroy other worlds, completely destroy other planets. Keep in mind that some of these planets that are at our level of development have never had war, don't have a concept or even a word for it, because they didn't evolve from a primate lineage. Now remember, monkeys and gorillas actually organize into tribes and have organized warfare and kill each other. This is in our genome. 98% of our genome is from primates. Whether you like it or not, it's the truth. What that means is that we're hardwired to engage in this kind of conflict, which is one thing when it's a tribe, another thing when it's muskets. But when you're dealing with scalar longitudinal weapons that go faster than the speed of light, which we've developed for the last 60 years, and you're talking about thermonuclear weapons, which are also very destructive, obviously, then you've got a problem. So the extraterrestrial civilizations, and there's a British intelligence guy I met with some years ago who said, you know, when the first nuclear weapon went off Trinity site over here in New Mexico, a big red flag went over the Earth. Warning, this is a civilization about to go off the rails, and not only can be a threat to themselves, but to other civilizations in space very quickly. Now, a friend of mine is a Harvard PhD psychologist. He says, yes, I think it may be that the Earth is viewed as the intergalactic insane asylum, because the definition, you know, if someone came into the ER, I'm an emergency and trauma doctor, if they're a danger to themselves or others, they end up being committed, okay, until they're not dangerous to other people. What humanity has become is a species at clear a present danger to itself and to others. So there is a component of the ET presence where they're very concerned about what we're doing. And yet, they also see the beauty of humanity, the enlightenment, the capacity for spiritual development, love, the capacity for becoming a people who can really go this next evolutionary step where we renounce violence and we renounce racism and we renounce all the isms and become a peaceful civilization joining others in space. And that's where we are, and that's the choice. That is the choice we have to make. That's what we're being called to make. And that's why we say we're having contact, and it's this final countdown to transformation. We're in the final sequence where we're having to make this choice. And so you have to consciously do it. This is the realm of free will. No one's going to come in here and say, you have to choose to be peaceful. The ETs, you know, Larry King asked, why don't they land, asked me, Larry King, when I was on Larry King Live, he said, why don't they just come and land on the White House lawn? Of course, everyone asks that. I go, whose White House? The Blanca Casa in Colombia? Casa Blanca? Whose White House? Number one. Number two, if they tried, they'd be blown out of the sky. Now, in the old days, there wasn't a whole lot we could do, but by 1947, when we had put into some of our radar domes what are called scalar longitudinal electromagnetic weapons, we were able to switch those on when an ET craft was materialized and disable their electronics, because those craft are totally electronic. They don't have any fuels on board. They're not running with Exxon Jet A fuel. So that's what happened at Roswell. I have an FBI document. It's in our disclosure materials if you go to disclosureproject.org, and you will see that at that time we had a new radar system at the only nuclear bomb squadron in the world over here in Roswell, New Mexico. And when there were two ET craft checking out what in the world we're doing with these nuclear weapons, we turned that system on and two ET craft collided. One went down north of Roswell, northwest, and the other one continued on a westward trajectory and crashed near Socorro. There were actually two vehicles that crashed. One was in smithereens, just pieces. And I know men who actually were there who gathered up and saw the ET writing. It looked like Egyptian hieroglyphs, actually, on the writing. That's true. The other one was fairly intact, and at least one of the ETs survived. And I have a military intelligence guy who actually saw that ET at Camp Perry in Virginia in 1951, still living 4 years later, although not very well, in a crate with shorts on, horrible, being tortured. So this is what's been going on, and this is the true story. What you're going to hear today is the true, unvarnished story about this, and why it is that we have to have an awakening and a mass uprising consciously, peacefully, to make contact for disclosure and to bring out these technologies so the Earth can be saved from its current trajectory of destruction. We are in the time where these crossroads have all come together. Spiritual, technological, social, political, macroeconomic, all of it. We're at this time of maximum potential change, which is both wonderful and breathtaking, because we cannot make the wrong choice. We cannot. So far, we've been making, as a society, not individually all of us, but as a society, we've been making all the wrong choices since about 1895 or so. Were technologies that Tesla tried to bring forward that would have enabled us to have free energy in our homes, which is not a myth, coming out of a generator the size that would fit on this table. And you'd have no pollution, no power bill, no environmental damage. These exist. We've seen them. I'm working with people in classified projects who work on these all the time, the 50th generation of them. Why don't we have them? Because the folks who wanted to keep that stuff secret in 1900, the so-called Gilded Age of the Rockefellers and Vanderbilts, their descendants, not necessarily those families, some of them, and that spiritual mindset of aggregating huge power to a small number of people has gotten more and more and more out of control. This is why we had World War I, World War II, and why they're planning World War III. This is why we went into Afghanistan and Iraq. This is why 9/11 happened. This is why, because there is a huge multi-hundred trillion dollar interest group that wants to maintain control through fear and through centralized macroeconomic control. And so understanding that and understanding how crafty the intelligence community is the only way we're going to free ourselves from it. So we have to say, look, there is no more time for us to play this ridiculous game of spy versus spy and all the war games. And as all of you know, I started briefing people like the CIA director and presidents and heads of state and the UN Secretary General back in the early 90s. And what I have found is that, for the most part, the people who we think are leading the planet have no knowledge and aren't, and the people who you would never suspect are the ones who are calling the shots. And so, as Senator Inouye said in the Iran-Contra hearings, he says there exists a secret government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own funding mechanism that's above the law and free from the law itself. Before him, Eisenhower said, beware the military-industrial complex, because it will become a threat to our democracy and our way of life. Now, this is from a five-star general who was, of course, a fairly conservative Republican. Why did he say that the day he left office when Jack Kennedy was being sworn in? It was because if you go to disclosureproject.org, you'll see that we have a man who worked with him in the White House at the time, who just passed away, God bless him, who was a lawyer, but at the time was a young man in the Army Signal Corps, who saw Eisenhower doodling pictures of UFOs and ET craft, and talked to him about the fact that he knew about this issue, but he had lost control of the projects. And this is the tragedy that we have now. The body politic has no idea that the emperor really has no clothes, that the president of the United States has had stripped from his control this $2 trillion operation that Rumsfeld told us right before 9/11 happened exists. Now, I mean, it was no less a figure than Bush's Secretary of Defense, who said we have a $1 or $2 trillion missing out of the Department of Defense. It's more like $3 trillion over the last few decades. And he asked the question, where has this gone? And then boom, the next day, 9/11 happened. And I think what people have to understand is that there's an enormous interest in this subject, even amongst folks like that in Washington, but not all of them control what's going on. And the control and command structure has gone off the rails. Basically, in 1956, if you want a short history of the United States, and we're going to have a lot to cover, but I want to get this out of the way. The Rockefeller Commission reorganized the Department of Defense and the CIA into a Byzantine and labyrinthine entity that prevented the Congress and the oversight committees and the President of the United States have operational control over super secret projects. And they wanted to protect this sort of crown jewel of secrecy, dealing with UFOs and ETs. The reason they did is that that was right about the time, that was within about 24 months of when we had finally figured out and built the operating system for how these ET craft move. In other words, we had operational anti-gravity devices. And there's a man, a senior scientist, at the largest defense lab in the United States. He's one of 14 crown jewels. I'm quoting from the Secretary of the Navy, who told us this. 14 crown jewels and national treasures in the Department of Defense scientific community. He's on our team. When he retires next year, he wants to work for the OrionProject.org to bring these technologies out because he's built them, he's seen them. He's done things with very high voltage systems. He's a sweet guy. He's about my age. I think he's exactly my age, about 55 years old. Sweet man, brilliant man. And we have about 24 people like that who want to work to bring out these technologies. We do not have the means to build the lab, equip it, and give these people a salary. So the problem is, you guys have to find that for us because I don't have it. If I'd stayed working as a doctor making $500,000 a year, I could have paid for it myself. But I've given that up. I'm just being blunt with you. And so now we need $5.7 million yesterday. So go find it for us. Someone in LA has enough money to do it. And it's all networking because this is an emergency and we can do this. But the question is, why hasn't it happened before? And it's because of moral courage, the lack of moral courage. And I talked about this yesterday a great deal. The President of the United States before W was a man named Bill Clinton. And after we provided the briefings for him and his CIA director, he sent his good friend to my home and said, look, if the President does what you're recommending, he will end up like Jack Kennedy. And I thought he was joking, and he wasn't. And I said to this man, I said, well, what do you want me to do? I'm just a country doctor at the time in North Carolina, rattling around in an ER, taking care of shootings and stabbings and car wrecks and heart attacks and strokes and all that fun stuff. And he said, well, we think you can do it. I said, oh, yeah? I said, what are you saying to me? And he said, the President and the CIA director and the people who are part of this secret group that we've found out think that you can do it. The 1/3 of Majestic, this is called Majestic 12 group, Magi, Cosmic Ops, think that you can do it. And why don't you do it? And I laughed. And this is exactly what Lawrence Rockefeller said to me. I was standing out on his deck in the Grand Tetons. You know, they own the Tetons. Of course, Rockefellers owned everything. And they gave it to the, if you've ever been to Grand Teton National Park, that was all owned by the Rockefeller family, but they kept out this absolutely amazing ranch where I've been there. And Lawrence turned to me and said, well, I can't do it because my family's already jumping up and down on my, should I say what he actually said? On my nuts. And it's hard to be honest because people like to sugarcoat everything. And I said, well, Lawrence, you know, we need your help, because he really was wanting to defect from his brother at Chase Manhattan Bank, David, and bring this stuff out. He says, oh no, I can't. My family is really upset with me that I'm even hosting you and the Clintons and all this stuff. And I said, well, Lawrence, you're old and you're rich and you're a Rockefeller. He said, doesn't matter. Blood's thicker than water, and I can't do it, but you can. So then I went to the head of the National Academy, the Deputy Director of National Academy of Sciences, who said the same thing to me, and to the members of the Intelligence Committee of the Senate, the Select Committee on Intelligence. And what I found was that there was this enormous cowardice in our society where people really want to have, and I found out eventually someone just pulled me aside and they said, look, you're expendable because you're not important, and this is risky, and no one wants to take this risk. So you're the expendable vehicle. I said, okay, I get it. And so it has come to pass. So I ended up leaving medicine to do this because I realized that we have a sacred obligation to now take the earth and protect it and nurture it and lift the burden we have placed upon it. Because if we don't, the earth shall cast off her burden. Take my word for it. She's a living, conscious being. And we then have to make this choice that we're going to do this with her and for her on behalf of not only ourselves, but the 20,000 generations waiting in the matrix of consciousness to manifest here. Because we're not doing something. It used to be, I'm part Cherokee. My dad was half Cherokee. Growing up in the South, it was called a half-breed, which is a pejorative racist term. My life's been very interesting. I had a black girlfriend in high school and the whole bit. Now I'm married to a Jewish woman for 32 years. And oy vey, what a geschrei, Bashrin. I know all the Yiddish. I know more Yiddish than most Jews because we lived in Israel for 3 years. But what ended up happening was that the tradition of everything having to be looked at was 7 generations into the future, which was the Native American concept. In some traditions, it was 20 generations. Actually, for all of us living here today, it's 20,000 generations. And let me explain why. We are at this point in this past few decades and the next few decades where we're going to close out a yuga, a large cycle, about 450,000 years. And there's another cycle that's opened. That's the Age of Enlightenment. That's 500,000 years, 5,000 centuries. That's 20,000 generations. But we're at that embryonic tilt point, that embryonic emergence point. And if you know anything about biology, the embryo is a multipotent creature where it will then develop into a full organism. However, injuries to the embryo then are magnified as the embryo becomes a full organism, a full human being. And so we have this precious thing that we have brought into the world, all of us that are here, and that's the consciousness of a new era, a time of universal peace, a time of enormous growth and potential for every human being, where we're going to become enlightened beings traveling amongst the stars, even as those who came here and seeded life on earth. That is our future. But there are others who have another vision. And these are what I call the eschatologists. At the core of the secrecy, the eschatology, and I'm sorry if my lexicon, it gets a little bit academic. Eschatology, you can look it up, is the study of how the world's going to end. And so you have people who have misinterpreted Scripture, including the New Agers with 2012 and the Mayan calendar. The Mayan calendar, that was a time of celebration because it was the end of one era and the opening of a time of enlightenment. Now, could there be a lot of chaos and change? Yes, there's always change and chaos when one phase becomes another. But it's not the end of the world, it's the end of the old world. This is what Sarah Palin doesn't understand when she thinks, okay, the people who are the 25% of Americans who think the world's 6,000 years old and we rode dinosaurs with saddles on them. You know, there's that museum in Kentucky you can go to. They're bringing all their children there to show them, no, I'm not kidding. This is for real. God help us all. I love the bumper sticker I used to see in Asheville, North Carolina, where I lived, which is a really hip community up in the mountains of North Carolina. It says, "Dear God, please save me from your followers." But Ouch. You can see why I can never be a politician. Too blunt, too direct, too honest. Could never be elected anything, and I don't want to be. I will tell you, however, that the people of the world get this. They get that we're in a time of great change and potential. And this is why they just overthrown Mubarak in Egypt. Now, okay, and this is, but what they don't realize is that there's an invisible dictator. There's a committee of invisible dictators that are keeping all of us enslaved. And when I wrote my briefing for President Obama after he got elected, I was asked to put together a briefing on all this. And if you want to go to look at the 6-7 page summary I wrote for the president, it's one of the best summaries of the subject, in my humble opinion, that has ever been created. And it's at our site, disclosureproject.org, along with some of the top secret documents that we've released that we gave the president. And basically in it, I say, look, it's time for a new emancipation declaration. The Emancipation Proclamation freed African Americans. However, the world macroeconomically slipped back into a type of slavery, where you now have 200 or 300 corporations and individuals who have more than half of the net worth of the world. You have 4 individuals, the 4 wealthiest ones, whose net worth is greater than 57 of the poorest countries on earth, with billions of people. This is a situation which is simply not sustainable. And what is going to have to change isn't some kind of a socialistic, it's a change of bringing out the truth. Because what happens when you have a device that allows you to have free energy for your home and vehicle, and every village in Africa, and every village in India, and every village in Indonesia, and every village in California has their own energy source, pulling it from the fabric of the expansion of space-time, the so-called zero-point energy field, which is huge. And you can run your car and your house on this. You never have a utility bill. Manufacturing becomes almost free because the energy factor with that, 100% of all the rubbish that's created can be recycled at zero energy cost. The footprint of humanity, even if we had 15 billion people on the planet, would be fairly nominal because there'd be 100% resource recirculation and recycling. Why? Because right now we can't do it because it's too prohibitively expensive because of the energy component. That's it. Archibald MacLeish and Buckminster Fuller said this in the 70s. We already back then had the means to recycle everything, so there was no pollution going out of any manufacturing or anything except the energy coming from smokestacks to generate electricity for this room is from a coal-fired power plant or a nuclear power plant or an oil-fired or gas. Very expensive. And so if you have to use a lot of energy to do this, then it's very difficult. What about all the nuclear waste? There's a man that we've worked with, Ken Shoulders, who has something called charge cluster arrays, where it actually can take nuclear material, radioactive, low level he's done experiments with, and turn it into inert substances through basically a type of transmutation with very high voltage charge clusters, electromagnetic clusters. The Department of Energy under Bill Richardson was going to fund the next step of that research. The grant was announced, and this secret group, Majestic, circled its limousines around the Department of Energy, threatened Bill Richardson, and they withdrew the grant after it was announced, which is almost unheard of at the Department of Energy. The OrionProject.org has not been able to get anything from the ARPA-E program from the Department of Energy, and they're wanting to put hundreds of billions of dollars out there on alternative energy, none of which is going to be enough. Now, solar's great, but how many people here, I just want to see, how many people have $100,000 to put a solar farm on their house? I just want to see. 1 or 2 people, yeah, that's it. You know, out of 100 people, there may be 1 person who could afford to do that, to make it truly independent, energy self-sufficient. None of you can run your car off of it because it's not dense enough. These technologies that the OrionProject.org are looking into, and which are behind the UFO propulsion system, I'm trying to explain the secrecy here real quickly, pulls energy out of the fabric of space-time. And what does that mean? It means that every cubic centimeter of space in this room has enough energy to run the Earth for a day. Think about it. Every cubic centimeter. Now, the zero-point energy field has been proven and been published in physics journals and scientific journals. The Casimir effect from, I think, the 1950s was proven to exist and is real. The question is, can you do this on a large enough scale to run a home or a car or an aircraft? The answer is yes. And when they discovered that they could do it, beginning with the early 1900s, with these generators that Tesla and others were doing. You know, J.P. Morgan turned to Tesla and said, look, this is great. You have a car running on free energy and electricity, but if I can't put a meter on it, meaning gasoline or electric meter, then you're not going to come out with it. That was J.P. Morgan. But now the descendants of J.P. Morgan and the masters of the universe, I call them MOTUs, M-O-T-Us, the MOTUs at Goldman Sachs and all these places, they do not want this stuff out because there's a $600 trillion nest egg that they're sitting on, trillion. Now, today the president released a $3.7 trillion federal budget, $1 trillion of which will be borrowed from China, mostly, and Japan. But think about it, that's the whole budget of the United States of America government. All Medicare, Social Security, defense, everything. This thing we're talking about, the nest egg they're protecting, is $600 trillion and counting. That's all the oil, gas, coal, petrodollars, derivatives, futures markets, utilities, transmission lines, oil fields, nuclear power plants, internal combustion engines, jet engines, rockets. All of it is obsolete. And they knew that in 1954. I can give you the date, October of 54, when all this stuff went black. They were until then, the aerospace journals in the early 50s were talking about anti-gravity and free energy. You can go back and look it up. It all went black because they finally got this totally operational, and these industrialists came in under the Rockefeller Commission, reorganized the Department of Defense. Everything I'm telling you is a matter of historical fact. You can go look it up. And what we have today is a retarded civilization, because what the ETs and what the cosmic being and what Gaia has been wanting for humanity for 100 years is for the children of the earth to be here in abundance, to be here in love, to be here living in peace, where we're not fighting over the last barrel of oil and invading countries for it. And that has all been hijacked by a bunch of people who are kleptocrats, the kleptocracy, people stealing, and who are wanting to amass more and more power. It isn't the money. Because once you have a few $1 trillion, it isn't about money. Money is whether or not I can put all my kids through school, which ain't cheap when they're going to Stanford and Yale and everywhere else. However, the problem is we're nerds, total nerd. I'm a muscle nerd, bench 410 and all. Okay, I like being a muscle nerd. So I just look stupid. I know, outrageous. What has happened is that all of this emphasis on secrecy has been because people want to control the power game. And what happens when you have free energy? In UFOs, if they're disclosed as real, the first thing any scientist is going to ask, who has an IQ over 2, I mean, if he's got a pulse, he's going to go, I'm going to show you some images today. How are these things moving? Where are they getting the energy? How are they going from hovering to 50,000 miles per hour and making right-hand turns on radar? We have the radar tapes from the FAA. I have CIA, I have it all. All this is in disclosureproject.org. It'd be the greatest documentary and film ever made if there's anyone in this room who knows someone who can do it and give us creative control over it so it doesn't end up being alien invasion of LA. So, which is why I've never done a big movie, frankly. They all want to turn it into this horror flick because it's Hollywood. Now, one of the problems, of course, when you look at this is that means that there's a very powerful special interest group that has several hundred times the financial clout and power than the entirety of the United States government, including the President of the United States. And they're the ones calling the shots to the classified programs at the NSA and CIA and Department of Defense that are highly compartmentalized. And let me explain how this works. And I'm going to cover this very quickly because we don't have time. We're going to go through a lot of stuff. What I really want to get to is how you guys can go home and make contact with these extraterrestrial beings and say to Washington and to the CIA, screw you. I'm a diplomat from Earth to these people, and there's nothing you can do about it, honey. All right? That's it. Which is what I told the head of Army Intelligence in '92 when he offered me $2 billion if I would cooperate with his program. Billion. Witnesses to that, by the way. I said, no thanks. I don't care about money. I don't care about power. I don't care about fame. I care about the truth and transformation of the planet. That's it. You know, I died when I was 17. I don't know how many of you know this story. And, I was raised a very, very devout atheist. And they were very, orthodox atheists. And, if it didn't fit in a test tube, it didn't exist. My uncle built the lunar module that put the first man on the moon. You know, that funny-looking thing? That was my uncle's gig at Grumman that became Northrop Grumman. I knew about this stuff as a little kid. Saw an ET craft when I was 8. But when I was 17, I got very sick and died, and had an experience with unity consciousness and God consciousness and with the divine being. And that's when I realized that you don't have to be afraid of anything, because there is no death. And your life and your soul is eternal. And the conscious mind, whereby we're all awake, is eternally present. And we are omnipresent beings all the time. And once you understand that and experience it, not just intellectually, but experience it, no one can take that from you. And therefore, the threats and the things that have happened to me, while from a human point of view and linear point of view have been painful, none of it has deterred me. And that's why I can say no to threats of death, and why I can say no to inducements for huge amounts of money and power, is that none of that is important if you know anything about spirituality. And the spiritual warrior, I mean, I'm kind of from a warrior tradition, the Shambhala warrior. The spirit warriors are what we need today. It's one thing to sit in a cave and be passive and be enlightened. It's another thing to gain that level of knowledge and enlightenment and engage the world and make it and change it. You have to learn to do both. We cannot let our enlightened people any longer stay in caves. This is what I said to the Dalai Lama. So I said, it's time to bring... I'm so blunt, terrible, outrageous, shocking. I mean, here it is. So it's time that we all come forward and together in enlightenment do that. So one of the things I found is that when you look at the people who are in Washington and large corporations, very wealthy people, they're all going, how can I get ahead doing this? That's the only question they ask. Raw ambition. That's what Bill Clinton asked, and that's why he took a pass. And then when he left the presidency, he became good friends with Papa Bush, who's a member of this majestic committee, along with Dick Cheney and Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, who had been head of the National Security Agency and deputy director of the CIA. I know a lot of these guys on this committee, and I've met with quite a few of them. And what you find is that everyone wants to be the next big monkey, okay? And so they'll sell their grandmother under a bus in order to get part of that action. And that's what happens. And so you have to be fiercely pure-hearted to turn away from the threats and the money and the inducements to do the right thing. And this is what we're lacking. And I talked about this yesterday a great deal, moral courage. Ultimately then, this is all going to be on the shoulders of those of you in this room and the 300 or 400 people yesterday who heard this, and the millions who've seen Disclosure Project, is that they're going to have to realize that the disclosure has happened already, because the president and the Congress refused to do it because they were afraid of being either ridiculed, which is the best way to keep things secret, is you marginalize the subject and ridicule it, or they were afraid of actually being snuffed, taken out. And ultimately then, it takes us common people, or everyday people, and it doesn't take that many of us. If a few people join together, huge things can grow from that. And when I started this project in 1990, it was really because ETs contacted me and said, pick up that which you have dropped, which was my interest in ET life and contact. And I literally was visited by it, and this was within about 60 days of when Paris de Cuellar was abducted out of his limousine in New York City, made to look like an alien abduction by the intelligence community. And that ended the disclosure effort of 1989, when the Cold War was ending. I was plan B, or F. I don't know what plan. I mean, I'm somewhere down the line. So I got taken out of mothballs. And I, worked for years as an emergency doctor and supporting 4 children. And now I have two grandchildren and one on the way and the third one. And I think, oh my God, you know, here we are in 2011 still using oil and gas and coal and nuclear power, still firing at ET craft when they begin to materialize near Earth orbit, still without any diplomatic effort from the UN and the State Department. And it's quite clear to me that now that 70% of the public, through Disclosure Project, now know about UFOs, because what we did when we did this Disclosure Project event in 2001, 10 years ago, is that it unleashed the global disclosure movement that has led to the French government releasing hundreds of thousands of pages of documents, the British government releasing them, New Zealand just opened their files. You know, and I do a lot of work behind the scenes. I have a home in Washington, I meet with people all the time. So this is happening. And when a third of the people thought ETs were real and UFOs were real back in when I started this effort, when I first briefed the CIA director, now it's 2/3 or 70% of the people know that UFOs are real and the government's hiding things. And in fact, 2/3 of the group Majestic, the Magi group, that are keeping this secret in the military-industrial complex support disclosure. But the other third will eat their own. And that's why it's still not officially acknowledged. But we're making progress, believe me. We've gone from 1/3 to 2/3 of the secret organizing entities in support of disclosure. Now, you say, well, isn't that the majority? I say, yeah, but this isn't a democracy in this group. All right? The 1/3 who are the hardliners are also the 1/3 that like to kill people. They're the ones who are the eschatologists who want to see the world go through a collective death experience. They're the ones who worship destruction. They're the ones who want to see us go to World War III. They're the ones who, when someone in their own group steps out of line, like former CIA Director Bill Colby, who was going to provide for my group an operational free energy device and $50 million in seed money to get it out to the world. This was in the mid-90s. They found him floating down the Potomac River the week he was going to meet with a member of my board. That's welcome to my life. So this has been very difficult. And what you find is that the majority doesn't rule even within these classified programs, and it's all very compartmented. And the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing half the time. For example, it wasn't until we came forward with the information about PLFs and ARVs. Everybody know what those are? Programmed life forms and alien reproduction vehicles. Now, since 1950s, we've been building these things that look like UFOs that fly around. And Lockheed Martin, and there's a facility up here near Palmdale and Lancaster that have them. I know where all the facilities are. The state-of-the-art ones are in Australia and in Dugway, near Salt Lake City, Provo, Utah. All underground. They're all connected through underground connectors. These devices were put into place in the 50s. And the early models, their startup mechanism, we have actually a schematic and a drawing from a guy who saw one of the early models, was a 24-volt marine battery. So you had this 24-volt marine battery. Anybody who's here is an engineer or a mechanical guy. And it would start up and go into these series of coils and high voltage resonant things. They would then pull energy out of the zero-point energy field and do it in a counter-rotating vortex, that thing that would lift. And it could just hover there in the hangar. And these were from the 50s and early 60s. I know guys who piloted them who are on my team. I have 550 top secret guys now that I'm working with. When Disclosure Project occurred, it was 110. Now it's 550, 5 times the number. And I get a new one every week. Pretty much every week a new one comes forward. So the question is, and these are people from deep inside secret government programs or corporate programs working on this. So I'm the sort of the, there's the majestic secret government, parallel government. There's the regular government that we think we elect and appoint and manage. And then there's a third thing, and that's our group. And it's become a formidable force. The guys at the agency are very afraid of us because I've got all this information. Something happens to me, it all hits the internet. Stuff that doesn't need to come out yet. So, because it's keeping me alive. You don't play all your cards at once. You know, this is playing chess in 38 dimensions. All right? It is, honest to God. So what we've decided is that this information has to be supported by the public, and then we found it was. And not only by the public, but by other governments. But the crown jewel of the secrecy, though, is the United States. because the United States Department of Defense has about $1 trillion budget. They acknowledge about $700 billion. Then you've got Homeland Security, CIA, NSA, other entities. It's around $1 trillion a year of our tax money. But what they don't realize is that within that trillion, there's about $200 billion a year going into so-called black projects. And this is what Rumsfeld was talking about. And over the years, it's been trillions of dollars. It's just missing. So one of the problems is that if you have an entity that can make off with hundreds of billions of dollars a year, and then also has become self-funding through the drug trade, all right, this is true. They don't like me talking about this. At Pahut Mesa, there's $40 billion in various currencies in a vault at Nellis Air Force Base from the drug trade. 40 billion sitting there in cash. I have guys who've seen this on my team. So what you find is that there's an enormous amount of funding that goes into these things, and it's very, very dark. And those guys are the hardliners. And when you get into this world of what are called unacknowledged special access projects, let me explain how they work. An unacknowledged a special access project just means it's top secret clearance and it's a compartment. An unacknowledged one works like this. Let's say this man is a 4-star general, and I'm a colonel. And so he's technically my commander-in-chief. And I'm in an unacknowledged special access project. Now, I have been told that if I tell anyone who's not in that project about its very existence, that there's a bullet with my name on it. Absolutely. Now, I have many guys on my team who've been in these projects, and they're for real. This is not a conspiracy theory. If the 4-star general calls me in because he's gotten whiff of this, I am to turn to my commander, my senior, and say, sir, no such project exists. That's exactly what happens when the president and some of the people at the Pentagon that I have briefed ask about these issues. So there has been a complete decapitation of the chain of command in the United States. And so this sort of silent coup d'etat that happened in the mid-50s is what we're living through now. And this is why the president doesn't want to talk about this. No president wants to admit that they're the emperor has no clothes. No president wants to admit that they're head of a government that has been completely emasculated and neutralized for 50-some years. And that's the situation today. I had a G7 country that we hosted last year in Washington, G7 being the top 7 industrialized powers in the world. And this country wrote a letter to me as the director of Disclosure Project in CSETI, Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. This letter is the most important UFO document from any government in the history of the world. And here's an irony. I can't release it because I would burn my bridges to this country. But this country wants to do contact with us. And so we have actually traveled to this country and are teaching their top people, their scientists, and their political leaders how to make peaceful contact. But this is an astonishing announcement I'm making, actually. And so when you see this happening, you know that it's reached critical mass. It's the Rupert Sheldrake concept of morphogenic fields. The consciousness has happened because you have a major G7 country saying, and it's beautiful, the wording in this letter says, we want to go on a long-term journey with you into space, making contact with these interstellar visitors. It's beautiful. This from the senior-most levels of a Ministry of Defense of a major G7 country. Beautiful. This all in the just last 3 years or so. Now, what you find is that these sort of friendlies to disclosure and contact are intimidated by the hostile ones that are in these unacknowledged projects, who don't mind killing people. And so they're waiting for leadership from the United States political establishment. But then now you're going to see a catch-22 here. But then the United States political establishment, the president, the CIA director, Leon Panetta, I put together this briefing, gave it to him as well, the head of the Intelligence Committee for the Congress. These sort of people, once they find out about these, the reality of this, they think, well, what can I do about it if I don't control them? And this is exactly what the CIA director, Woolsey, said to me. How do we disclose that which we have no access and control over? This would highlight the biggest constitutional crisis in American history, and nobody wants that to happen who are in power. So they take a pass on it. They kick the can down the road and into my lap, and now into your lap. So it's our task now. You see? That's how this is the Washington two-step. And that's how it works. I swear to God. So now, to give you an idea of how deep this runs, is that I had I did a briefing for the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And this man, who is an admiral, was given a document that I have here, and it's now on our website, disclosureproject.org, and it's a National Reconnaissance Office document that lists the project names and code numbers. And it's from the 1990s. It's not from an old one from the 50s. So at the time I did this briefing, this was all fairly recent actionable intelligence, what we call actionable intelligence. So this guy wanted to know about this subject, so he called up this one compartment that he recognized and said, look, this is Admiral so-and-so, I'm the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And the people who were working that operation said, yes, sir, we know who you are. Of course. I mean, it's the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the biggest military in the world, so you think they have some juice here, huh? And they say, and he says, well, I want to be read into this project. And they say, sir, we cannot discuss this project with you. You don't have a need to know. And he says, well, God damn it, if I don't have a need to know, who does? And basically, they said, sir, we cannot and will not discuss this with you further. Click. And they broke the line and blocked him. So by the time I came, I gave all this information to him before I did this stand-up briefing at the Pentagon, where I brought astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who was the sixth man to walk on the moon, and all that. And basically what happened is that he said, well, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I don't have access, and I'm being blocked even though I'm the head of intelligence, Joint Chiefs of Staff. He says, who else has had this happen? I said, well, the President and the Secretary of Defense Cohen and the CIA Director and the Senate Intelligence Committee members I've met with, and the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is the biggest intelligence gathering entity in the Pentagon. It's almost as large as the CIA, the DIA. He says, are all of them being blocked access? I said, yes, because the ones that are in those positions right now are people who are in favor of disclosure, and they're not going to tell you. He says, well, who is in this? I said, you have to be willing to take a blood oath to the secrecy and to World War III and interplanetary war. And none of you guys want that, do you? He says, oh, no. I said, that's where we're headed. What are you going to do about it? He says, what can I do? The best thing I have is a B-2 stealth bomber. And these guys have their own Air Force and Space Force of anti-gravity things that people see launching out of here. If you go up to the high desert, you'll see them come out of Edwards at 3 or 4 in the morning. So the question becomes, who's zooming who here? What government's really running the show? And it's not the people we elect and appoint. Now, could they get control of it? Yes. But they'd have to have a lot of courage. And that's what's missing. So what I tell people is that the thing that all of you have that they don't have is moral courage and the knowledge and the spirituality to do this. And that's why all of you can become ambassadors from Earth to these civilizations. All of you can become a point of change that then radiates out non-locally through consciousness to the 7 billion children of Earth. That's how consciousness happens. That's how change happens. And if you understand that dynamic, you understand how powerful a few people are. Now, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, cseti.org, we've now trained a couple thousand people all over the world to do this. And we're going to actually do a 3-day event in Orange County down here in Irvine, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday if you guys want to come. And it's going to be an event where we, during the afternoon, we go into how to go into remote viewing states and meditative states and contact using consciousness. And then we're going to go out under the stars or the clouds. I don't care what it is. We always go out. And we're going to make contact at this canyon in State Park that is we've reserved just for the group. That's closed at night, and we're going to have access to it. And when we were there about 15 months ago, we actually had an ET vehicle come right into the valley, and we had an ET voice materialize right in the center of the group that we recorded. That's on this video. Now, one of the amazing things about this is that when you realize that every human being can contact them this way, then you understand that the power of control that this other group has is a paper tiger, completely. And it's all in your mind. So free your mind. And that's what I really want to share today, is how to free your mind from that and be the people who make contact and do disclosure and help the OrionProject.org bring these energy devices out, because it's very, very unlikely that we're going, now, you know, I still provide briefings to people like the President and members of Congress, and there's some great support we have in Washington and in Paris and in London and other countries. But I really see the change happening from us. I see the change happening from people like you and me, rather than the people who we think are leading the world. Because I think we're actually the leadership of the world, everyone in this room, all of us who are conscious and awake. And because when you do something from a higher level of consciousness and a deep state of samadhi, and you intend it from there, that's how you manifest reality. That's how I manifested the Disclosure Project, being a country doctor in North Carolina. That's how I manifested CSETI. That's how we manifest contact. That's how we're going to manifest a whole new world. Because here is the world all of you know the world we're living in today, which can be rather oppressively depressing when you contemplate it, with the poverty and the wars and the corruption. However, there's only a few people who really benefit from that system. It's like in Egypt, there were a handful of generals and people benefited from that system. The rest didn't. That's why 40% were in poverty. But what you realize is that the people who are in this system, it's sort of like the Matrix, and I'm Morpheus giving you a red pill here. You are the guys, all of you are the ones who can awaken and effect change immediately and easily. And that's the message of great hope, because here's the world that is not on the far horizon any longer, but is right here, very close. A world where we have open contact with ET civilizations peacefully. A world where all of these sciences and wondrous sciences and technologies that have been withheld from the Earth for 100 years are unveiled and benefit all the children of Earth. And with that, the abolition of economic slavery and poverty in a generation. I mean, literally in 20 years, there would be no poverty on Earth. None. The healing of the Earth's biosphere would take place in 10 to 20 years. All nuclear waste and chemical waste could be transmuted into inert, benign materials. These technologies are extant on Earth today. This is what the world we can have. And on the foundation of that justice and abundance, we can have peace. Because we're no longer going to have to play one race or one people or one religion or one group over another in order to advance another species. But be careful. Let's not unite the world against what Wernher von Braun warned about, the false alien threat. This is the biggest problem with disclosure. This is the hugest problem. For years, I've thought of retiring from doing any of this, because so much of my work has been hijacked by charlatans who have then turned it into Alien Invasion or Invasion LA. And you know, people come to my things, they find information, and they turn it into a horror flick. They take the stuff we've done and they turn it into another book, and they'll tell you that the evil reptilians and the Greys are here to eat us for lunch, and the Venusians and the ones that look like they came from Scandinavia are our friends, and we're going to have this big. This is all part of a Manichaean, absurd paradigm propounded and actually forced out onto the public through either unwitting dupes of the intelligence community or the intelligence community itself. And the purpose of it is to cause people to have a new enemy. And even if you say, well, there are 1,000 ET species out there that are good, but there are a couple that are bad and we need to resist them and fight them, they've got you. They've got you in the Manichaean, they've got the new enemy. And that's what they want you to believe. This is why so much work went into PLFs, Programmed Life Forms. And if you look at the videotapes of some of the things like what Stan Romanek, I've been at his home, that one that's in his kitchen that's going like this, that's actually one of the PLFs. And the intelligence community had called him up and said, Stan, this is one of the fake ones. Now, he may have had real contact. I don't know. But I know what that one was. That was a robotic, artificial ET, what I call an alien. See, ETs are extraterrestrial interstellar civilization. Aliens, if you use the word alien, you're talking about the man-made stuff. Because alien is a xenophobic negative word, so I never use it. To me, it's like it's a racist term, alien. I never use it. So the thing that are the aliens are the Greys and the reptilian and these other creatures that we've been manufacturing. Now, when did we start doing this? Back in the 40s and 50s. So the facility at Dulce at the Four Corners area is a genetics lab. There's a genetics facility at Sandia. There's a facility in Australia. There's a group of physicists I know who work there, and there are these things that look like grays and others coming off a conveyor belt. And they have integrated circuits in their neural complex, and they're put on board these ARVs that look like UFOs, and they use electromagnetic weapon systems and chemicals, and they abduct people. That's what happened to Paris de Cuellar. So and then they have implants. Now the implants, if you look at the implants that are being made, EG&G and a group of other high-tech electronic firms, these systems, have been making these in Siemens for decades. If you look at the tape we just released, posthumously, from a guy named Pollock, disclosureproject.org, top secret guy. He had worked with a man who developed, back in the 70s, some of the implants that they began to mass produce. Siemens made about 2 billion of them at the time. And these are implants that are RF frequency, radio frequency, and they both connect to satellites, but they can receive signals. And they can affect on a scalar level of what are called psychotronic and radionic type of effects. These are the ones that are being put in people. And you know, the folks who are extracting them, I've looked at the data on it, and I'm going, yeah, but I know who's manufacturing this. Now, what they're going to do is say, see, the aliens have done this. So this is the cosmic 9/11 that none of you know about and that no one wants to talk about. And this is why I've been blacklisted off of George Nuri's show, because I've talked about this. Coast to Coast won't let me on because I've revealed this. Yeah, that's true. The truth of, yeah. So, look, I don't care. I'm going to tell you the truth whether it gives you pleasure or not, because you need to know the truth of who's playing with your mind and why this information has been stopped. They are desperate for people to have a new enemy. Because, look, there are 70 al-Qaeda in all of Afghanistan. This by the acknowledgement of the CIA, 7-0. This, we have 140,000 troops chasing at a cost of over $100 billion a year. Come on. You know, they have to keep this machine alive, and the next big thing to play is the alien card. And we're about a minute, a nanosecond from that. Don't be fooled again. And this is why I am the most hated person in the UFO field. It's because I am absolutely, have the data, I have the documents, I have the witnesses, that in fact, there are abduction squads being run by secret government human entities using programmed life forms and ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles, and very advanced electronics. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is exactly what's happening, and this is why you have all been diseducated. Not miseducated, deliberately diseducated, for the purpose of preparing you. And the New Age and UFO subculture is the vanguard of those purveying this information to others, ironically. So you have all become the carrier vehicles, not all of you, many of you have become the carrier vehicles for launching interplanetary war. What great news. I told you yesterday, some people aren't going to like what I have to tell you. The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. Now, I want to go into what we're really here for, and that is how we've made contact and how you can make contact. Now, in a couple hours, you know, it's hard to cover a whole week's worth of training material, but I want to give you a sense of it, because you guys are all conscious, and it's Conscious Living or Conscious Something Conference. What is it? Conscious some, yeah, life. Sorry. I'm on a jet every week. I have no idea where I am. I think I'm in LA. But the truth about it is that we have within us something very beautiful, and that is the mind. And the heart of the mind, the heart of the compassion that the Buddha talks about, is the fact that we are all one people. If you look at the logo, it says C-SETI, one universe, one people. There's actually one being shining through the eyes of every body in existence, every sentient creature. And when you look at the stars at night, know that every star system that is stable has planets with beings who are capable of knowing this cosmic being, who are awake. That is true. The universe is peopled. I use the word people not in a human sense, but in the sense of intelligent, conscious life. And interestingly, if you understand morphogenic fields, and they have a head, 2 arms, and 2 legs, but they come in all sizes, from a foot or 2 high. I have anyway, I was called in on a case where there was one species that's about 18 inches high, and I held the body of the baby in my hands. Y'all know about this? Oh, well, he was dead, but had his head crushed in. We're not sure who killed it. But anyway, an institute I know has this creature, has this being, and Dr. Bravo, who's on our board, and myself were called in because we're doctors, and I'm had a disclosure project to investigate it and look into it. And the institute that has this doesn't know what to do with it, and I'm trying to have them disclose it, but it's tied up in a lot of political problems in another country. But what I'll say is that all these beings, they can be in various sizes. They may be 18 feet tall, or they may be 1.5 feet tall, 18 inches tall. It doesn't matter. But they have a head, 2 arms, 2 legs. Their internal organs may be different. I mean, I've seen various types of internal organs. It's one particular being that I've actually personally held, and I have great photographs of. We can see the neural tissue, but had a very different chest cavity. It had 10 ribs instead of 12. It had, only 1 bone in the lower leg and the forearm instead of 2. You have an ulnar, anyway, the anatomy. So what was interesting is that it was bimorphic, and it was the phenotype, I'm going into science terms. The physical expression was very much like a humanoid, but it had very different features. It had only 4 bones in the skull instead of 6. It had 2 bones that came across in the middle in the forehead instead of 1 frontal bone. I mean, it was totally, anatomy was fascinating from the point of view of being any other doctors here. I mean, it's really fascinating. But what you realize when you have contact, which we have had with hundreds of these different species with CSETI, hundreds, is that they're all conscious. And here's where we're going to all meet. This is where we all come together. Black, white, gay, straight, male, female, Alpha Centauri, Andromeda, Zeta Reticuli, wherever, we're all awake, and the conscious mind is a singularity. And Erwin Schrödinger, who was the father of modern quantum mechanics, said that the mind is a singularity. There's a total number of minds in the universe is 1. And so all of you sitting in this room, you think you're attaching to your ego and your body, but in reality, that exists. But in reality, the mind whereby you're hearing my voice is 1 mind, the awakeness itself, the essence of conscious mind. And when you experience that state, the samadhi state, you can then go into a state where you see anywhere in the world, anywhere in space, any place in time, space, anywhere. Because the nature of the conscious mind is that it is omnipresent. It means it's everywhere, and that it's eternal, meaning that it transcends linear space and time. And time simply doesn't exist at the level of transcendent consciousness. So what we're going to go through this afternoon is sort of a discovery of what we really are, who we really are, because we are actually all one being. There's a wonderful Sufi saying, "Thinkest thyself a puny form when the universe is folded within thee?" That literally the entirety of all that exists in creation is folded within every single person. We are all sort of a cosmic hologram of the unbounded. And the entry point to accessing all of that is the conscious mind itself, the awake mind, but not the monkey mind, thinking about lunch and dinner and I have to pee, or whatever. It's okay, it's the, it's the level of consciousness that is beyond thought, beyond time, beyond space, and it is pure peace. And that's the transcendent state. That's the meditative state. And that's why the Vedas are very important, because the mantras that came from the ancient Vedic tradition, which is what we teach, are actually the sound component of pure thoughts that enliven the mind and allow the mind to go into unbounded silent awareness. And that is exactly what we do. We actually do this as a team. That's what we're going to do in Orange County. We're going to spend a whole week in Marco Island, Florida, those of you who can come. next month. And every afternoon we go through this and we do a puja, a Vedic ceremony, and I teach a meditation approach, and then I teach people how to then go into that state and then remote view space, or remote view underground, or remote view another star system, and then connect to the extraterrestrial communication systems. Now, this is very important that you understand. Everything that goes faster than the speed of light, which is ET, not coming out of Lockheed Martin, but everything that goes faster than the speed of light interfaces with a realm that the mystics called the astral and etheric. So when you have a lucid dream and you're flying, how many people have had a flying dream at some point, or a dream where you've seen something in the future? How many people have had a precognitive dream? So you're all very conscious. What that is actually your body of light, which is able to move in another dimension, which is the astral etheric. And beyond that, the celestial. And beyond that, the tonality. And beyond that, pure, unbounded, infinite mind. And these are all folded within us. But when you're dealing with an interstellar civilization, when they are moving through space and time, they can take a very high voltage resonant frequency around this thing. It's a Tibetan prayer bowl we're going to use in a little while. And it can actually slip out of linear space-time. Looks like it's disappeared. But if you look with a celestial perception, you'll see it hovering in the room. Still in this shape, but maybe just a hint of it. And it can then blip into linear space-time and blip back out. This is exactly what Colonel Corso experienced when he was out in New Mexico, and one of these landed out near the Trinity site where we detonated the first atomic weapon. But that was in '56 when he had this encounter. And what the ETs are able to do with their craft, they can also do with communication systems. So that when you do a visualization in consciousness and you see, if you're in this expanded state of awareness where you've become the cosmic being, and you see a spacecraft out in space, near the Earth, in a mountain, on another star system, you can then connect to the ETs and through them to their telemetry systems. Okay, so like I have this little black box here that's transmitting. This is at the speed of light, because it's electricity. It's the speed of electrons and stuff. But imagine that they have a box that interfaces with coherent thought. Okay, and that thought is emanating from an expanded state of consciousness. So we call this coherent thought sequencing, and we're going to go do this in a few minutes. And the coherent thought sequencing enables all of you to then connect and then show them where you are. So what we do, there are three major steps to this. First, going into unbounded mind and the state of the samadhi, the relaxed state of mind. Secondly, to then actively remote view the presence and location of the extraterrestrial vehicles. And then third, to turn that into a vector, where you then connect with their electronics and their individuality and their craft and show them your location. So if you, let's say you see them out near Saturn, and there's a very huge craft out near Saturn now. Had a Defense Intelligence Agency general tell me about it a couple months ago. He turned ashen white when he saw the images of it. One of the ones that we're tracking out in our solar system is 26 miles across. One ET vehicle, 26. It's the size of the LA basin. Anyway, so believe me, if they were hostile, it would have been all over the time believe me. Before the monkeys started developing thousands of nuclear weapons, it would have been point, set, match over. Forget about the invasion stuff. Okay, the invasion will come from Lockheed Martin masquerading as ETs. This is the cosmic 9/11, the cosmic Gulf of Tonkin that all of you have been programmed for, whether you know it or not. So, free your mind. Okay, it's like the En Vogue song. I love it. Now, what you have to realize is that this means that you can do this with very low tech. Now, are there electronics that can be developed that do this? Yes. The guy who invented for the CIA in 1956 the electromagnetic remote viewing systems is a guy I knew very well before he died. He offered me those systems. I said, no, I'll do it the Vedic way. Because before I was a medical doctor, I was a meditation teacher and a Sanskrit scholar, and used to tutor people in Sanskrit and the Vedas and in my misspent youth. So I've had like 8 careers by age 55. Anyway, this is the most difficult one, what I'm doing now. But I think that when you understand that all of space and time and all of consciousness and all that exists in the cosmos is folded within you literally as a cosmic hologram, that your mind is that entry point, the window of your own soul. You can dive through and go into this unbounded state, and then you can see a remote place. You can see the ET craft, and then you give them this vision of your location. So you're bilocated, you're seeing them out near Saturn, and then you show them who, you introduce yourself, and you invite them to come in any way that's safe and appropriate for that time and place. Get to this in a minute. And you say, I am in Orange County in a canyon in Irvine. Let's say that's where we are, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, those of you who are coming. And we show them our location. Now, what we do, though, is that we show them our location from their perspective. So now that you've remote viewed their location, you're showing them then our solar system, the third planet from the sun, Earth, North America, California, Southern California, Orange County, Irvine, and this park and canyon and lake where we're going to be zap. And you hold that. At the same time, I'm sending up a 500 milliwatt laser that goes 200 miles into space. This thing. Do not play with this near an airport. And at the same time that we're playing these tones that were recorded from an ET vehicle in a crop circle, and that we had also visit us at Mount Shasta a couple years ago, and those tones are playing over radio frequencies that we're sending out. So we've got linear with light and laser and tones, and then we have non-local with consciousness and thought. And all this is going on simultaneously at the site. And here they come. We have never done this and not had ETs come. Never. Now, they don't always come in materialized like a Steven Spielberg movie, because they can't without being killed. And I want to explain something here. And a lot of people consider this sort of a cop-out, and it isn't. When I started this project in 1990, there were weapon systems in space that were STI cover weapons. The SDI program, the Star Wars programs, was a cover for these weapons targeting ET vehicles. Now, 20 years later, they have gone up exponentially in their efficacy. They actually were in orbit by 1965. There's a man on our team who actually worked with Hughes Aerospace and some of the other big industries back in the mid-60s here in the LA area, who helped put these weapons in space and design them. And these are using not missiles like you think of a bullet shooting at something. They're using what I described earlier, and these are these electromagnetic weapons that can actually completely destroy something faster than the speed of light, because the scalar longitudinal weapons go faster than the speed of light. And so when we're doing this, unfortunately, if I'm around, it's known. So there is constant monitoring from the NRO satellites of my location and what I'm doing, but it doesn't stop the ETs. But what it means is that they may not fully materialize, they may materialize briefly, and then they'll be there in a trans-dimensional form. Let me talk about that for a moment. When you have something that is of extraterrestrial origin, and a woman asked me this yesterday after the talk, because she'd had an encounter with what looked like a spirit being, astral, but it had a helmet and had space gear on. I said, yes, but you have to understand, if you're going faster than the speed of light, you're in a condition very close to what we would call a lucid dream state. That's why that area out at Area 51 is called Dreamland. Because the experiments they've done, the people the men in those systems experience almost like a lucid dream state because they're quasi-materialized. This is being done in classified human projects. Interstellar civilizations, when they're going faster than the speed of light, a priori are not in this form. Why? Because if you go faster than the speed of light, you cannot be in a accreted, concrete, linear, three-dimensional form. You literally, through very high voltage, resonant frequency systems, this thing slips out of linear space-time and goes into what we would call the near astral. or other dimension. And it travels then at multiples of the speed of light and then reappears and rematerializes where you are. Now, if they materialize or begin to materialize, they send off a series of electromagnetic energies that National Reconnaissance Office satellites have detectors. They're called neutrino light detectors, and they pick them up, and then they target them. We had an extraterrestrial vehicle emerging from Mount Shasta a few years ago, and it was right at the point of materializing. It was in a brilliant white. It was almost like a celestial white disk floating towards us. And in this case, it was a 747, or a big aircraft that had been circling, watching the area, and it fired one of these scalar weapons. And you couldn't see anything. All you heard, and there were people on this who were there, who are here today with my team, you just heard this thing roaring from space, and it plowed a few hundred yards in front of us and crashed into the side of the mountain and actually ripped the trees down and then burrowed into the earth and went just before that thing fired. This ET craft dematerialized. But they were still there, because what we've trained our people to do is to see them when they're dematerialized in the etheric and the astral, the subtle energies. So how many people here have seen like a spirit being or an aura or what have you? If you've done that, you can see the ETs in that form. And if you can see them in that form, then they're going to really want to visit you, because it isn't always safe for them to be in the flesh and blood. Now, have we had them there fully materialized? Yes. Have we had the craft there fully materialized? Yes, you're going to see some images. But that's something that I always tell them, please only do what is safe and appropriate for this time and place. Because the Earth, not just North America, you can be in the Brazilian rainforest, is actually an armed camp. And there are satellite systems up there that look for these ET craft as they approach Earth or if they're materialized, and they do target them. And so we're doing this CE5 initiative, we call it, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. Everybody know that. Fourth kind is when you go on board. A third kind is a sighting within a very close range. A second kind is a landing trace. First kind is a sighting at a greater distance. I coined the term Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind in 1990 to describe what we're doing. And that's when humans deliberately, as ambassadors, invite them to come, and they do. And everything we're going to show you in a moment is a Close Encounter of the Fifth Kind, where we set up the conditions, did the remote viewing, used the electronics that we have, the lasers and the thought consciousness streaming, to invite the ETs to come. But they come in 1,000 different ways. They may only come in a tone. Often when we're ringing this, we'll do this, and then all of a sudden from trans-dimensional space-time around us, they'll begin to ring. And we'll take a photograph, and there'll be something there. So it's a beautiful thing. It's very Vedic. If you understand name and form, how many people know what name and form is in the Vedas? And where the tonality manifests the object, that's how you materialize reality. And actually, the Great Spirit, the divine being, manifests the entire universe first through tonality. Tonality. Sound. And that's how ETs often contact us. Tonality and sound manifesting form. It's beautiful. And that's how they manufacture things. You ever wondered why all the ET craft, not the things made by Lockheed Martin and Northrop, my uncle's whole company, don't have any parts? You know, if you study this and you look at it, and the materials are so pure that we couldn't even make them in a vacuum in space, it's because they're not actually digging up ore and hammering them together and then putting rivets in there like a Boeing 747. They're actually using infra-ultrasound, a tonality, that then materializes that craft, their suit, everything. Get it? So if you understand the Vedas, this is what we're going to go through for 3 days in Orange County, because the sciences of extraterrestrial transdimensional reality and the sciences that are within the ancient Vedas that most people have lost and don't understand are like this. Because guess where the Vedas came from? The interstellar civilizations from the Sirius Orion sector. Right? So that's who we are, and that's where we're going. Now, when the extraterrestrial civilizations approach Earth, and they're not materialized, how are you going to see them? Well, it's interesting because there may be an orb. Now, we were at Joshua Tree a couple years ago, and a year and a half ago, whenever it was, and we went out into this landing site where a few years ago, a 200-foot diameter disc that was flat on the bottom and came up, and it was sort of a teal green that came straight out of the zenith and went into the earth. And they were showing us their underground facility at Joshua Tree, which is a national park, which they can't invade with chemical and biological weapons, which they've done at other places, the secret government. So when we were there and we saw this, the ET said to me, "This is where we want you to do your work." So we've been going there. And we're going to be there next November if you want to join us. Now, what's interesting is that we were in the same spot last year in 09, in November of 09, and an orb materialized. Not something like you see with a flash bulb. Most of those are dust particles. But this was actually physical. It actually materialized right beside me. And I knew it was a group of ET beings being held there in a trans-dimensional electronics form. Now, you have to get your mind around what I'm going to call electronic astral projection, where an entire craft and all the occupants could be in the form of a plasma-type energy. And all you see in linear space-time is an orb or a plasma energy. But if it were to fully materialize, it may be 800 feet across and have several hundred people on it. Okay? Because you have to understand time and space has plasticity to it. We'll get into this. I mean, we're going to get into too much stuff here. But the basic idea here is that it's another dimension. And trans-dimensional physics are very, very well understood now by our group. And what we're doing is using that trans-dimensional physics to make contact, but also to communicate. So when we're out there, we not only have all these contact vectors, we have all these electronics. And Emery over there has, he's like the gearhead of the century. He's got all this fantastic magnetometers and, electronic field meters and laser detectors and every kind of frequency. So we'll be out in the middle of a national park where there's a dead zone. You can't even get cell phone service. And all of a sudden, our electronics start lighting up. Guess what? There's a new, just last week, iPhone, iPad app where you can go to the App Store and download all the CSETI, CE5 contact protocols, the tones, the meditations, all of that at the App Store. And this is going to go viral. We just announced it. There are a couple hundred people have already gotten it. But this is available now, and it's amazing what it is. It's called the CSETI ET contact app or something. CSETI. So anyone with an iPhone or an iPad, tell them this is available, and you can actually take this. It actually turns your iPhone into a magnetometer. So your iPhone, when an ET craft is materializing or approaching, will have a gauge and a sound that will go off as the ET craft is approaching. This is amazing technology. We've just come out with it in the last week, thanks to Todd Goldenbaum, who is Raven's husband. So, by the way, Raven, stand up. You see her if you want to join us in Orange County on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We're going to have all this equipment with us. It's going to be awesome. Now, when you go into this state of meditation, but then afterwards you're standing around with your eyes open, you can actually learn to see these ET beings when they're dematerialized. And then they might fully materialize. In France, about 6 months ago, we had six of them that fully materialized, like this guy here, in the field. And then when I approached, and they were still there, but when everyone began to approach, they dematerialized and then came into the electronics. And Emery was holding a magnetic field meter, a magnetometer, and I had a compass, and they came right into our space transdimensionally. And the magnetometer was beating at the pace of their heart, and the compass needle was going beep, 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 beep. And we're in the middle of this 2,000-acre estate in France. It's so beautiful, the contact we're having. It's in every way you can imagine, and it's physical, and it's transcendental, and it's in consciousness, and it's in every level, and this is why I'm still doing this work. It's so beautiful, and we have never gone out to make contact and not had them come, never. And people say, how many times have you actually seen ET vehicles and craft? I say, several thousand times. In a week of going out, we will see them several dozen or 100 times, depends on where we are in the group, the coherence of the group. And Now, it used to be I used to do this with like 100 people out in the field. Now we're keeping them pretty small. So, it would be like 20 people in Orange County or something. We're capping it now because it was too much to manage for me. But the app is there, and the whole training program is at cseti.org and at disclosureproject.org. And what we want to do is have tens of thousands and then millions of people doing this that just overruns the secret government. Because this is what the Army intelligence guys didn't want me to do in 1992. When they saw the contact we had, they said, "What the hell are you doing?" Because they knew we had discovered the Rosetta Stone of contact. And that is all within yourself. Yes, the lasers help, the electronic tones help, but the fundamental reason I'm here for conscious life, living, whatever it is because this group is about consciousness. And that is the science of the next millennium. And if you understand that conscious mind is an unbounded, non-local field that is always within you. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to be on a bed of nails for 60 years. It's always within you. All you have to do is be still and know that I am God. Okay, that's saying, be still and know that the divine being is within you. And then you utilize that aspect of your mind that's omnipresent to see any place and contact them and invite them. And we do this in a spirit of universal peace and without prejudice and without fear. Now that's the hardest thing, is because most people have seen too many movies and seen too many books, and they go out there and they go, "Oh, well, it's great if ones that come and that look like Norwegians, but if there's another one, I'm going to be afraid." I'm going, "No, you're not ready to be an ambassador. You're still living in the world of duality and the Manichaean worldview that your mind's been colonized with." We welcome all species, any race, any color, anyone from any star system. If they can get here and they're allowed off their planet, it means that they're peaceful. Because, how do I know this? We've tried to go off our planet. And the guardians of the universe have said, "Niet, no, not going there yet. Go home." This is what Neil Armstrong meant when he said, when we landed on the moon, the crater was crowded with extraterrestrial vehicles, and they did not want us coming out there yet. Why? Because we were going out there as part of the Cold War. We were in a space race with the Russians. We were doing this within a paradigm of division and militarism and war. The entry ticket to going out into space is universal peace. Not just peace on Earth. That's too old. That should have been 100 years ago. Peace in the cosmos. Peace universal. And that's the time we're in, because that is the requirement of the current hour. It isn't enough to strive for world peace. It has to be universal peace. Because God help us if we unite the world around an Independence Day type scenario where all the people of the world are united in peace, because we're fighting an interstellar civilization that's being masqueraded by the secret government with ARVs and what have you. Don't be fooled again. I had a man who was on the planning committee in 1974 for the intelligence community and the corporate aerospace world, who came to the briefings we put together for Congress in 1997. This man had sat on the committee where they had put together everything needed so that they could hoax an invasion of Earth, 100% controlled by humans, made 100% to look like alien. And he said every single world leader will be deceived by it. That was fully operational by 1974 that he knew of, and I have learned before that. This is why we have to be extremely careful, I mean extremely careful, not to buy into the xenophobia and the fear. Because I can tell you right now, the only thing we have to fear are our fellow humans on this. And the extraterrestrial civilizations, every single one of them that we've had contact with, are peaceful, understand cosmic awareness, they're transdimensional, and let's face it, if they wanted to make trouble for us, it'd be over. I want to talk about this for a moment, because everyone looks at too much science fiction and too many UFO videos and books. If you have the ability to travel faster than the speed of light through interstellar space, do you really think that they would have waited till now, if they were hostile, to take the Earth? And by the way, what is on this planet that they need? If you're able to go faster than the speed of light, and materialize an entire spacecraft vedically from infra-ultrasound. They're not here, Zachariah Sitchin, I'm sorry to tell you, to have monkeys pull gold out of the ground. They don't need my sperm and your eggs. I got news for you. Don't flatter yourself, honey. Your junk ain't that good. And you know, my daughter has a PhD in genetics and neuroscience. We'd laugh. You know, you can take a epithelial cell, and all your genes are in there. And with the technology they have, they could clone you and you and you and you if they wanted to. They don't need to drag you on board a spacecraft and extract your eggs and sperm. This is being done as part of the parallel government's paradigm of fear. None of it makes any sense if you know the least scintilla about science. So the actual extraterrestrials that are here are universally peaceful. There is a hierarchy. They're here under coordinated system with what I call the guardians of Earth, which are the God consciousness civilizations that are the progenitors of life on Earth. There are ones who are concerned about what we're doing to the Earth because the Earth is precious and sacred, and they're concerned what we might do if we escape the biosphere and end up out in their solar system creating the havoc that we've created on Earth. But the fact that they're concerned about our hostility does not make them hostile. Don't conflate the two. You understand? So if you understand this and meditate on this, think about it deeply, you can free yourself from the paradigm of fear, go out under the stars and invite them, and they're going to come. They do not want to come to people who are at a level of evolution of a Manichaean worldview of us versus them. They do not want to come to entertain you. They're not dolphins at SeaWorld. They're not your cosmic dolphins, okay? If you want to connect to them spiritually and for a pure-hearted reason, they will be there with bells on in any way they can. And be careful what you ask for because you're going to get it, okay? Because they want to make contact with the enlightened people of Earth, which are you folks. So I think that's what, once you understand that, and you understand these protocols, which are really pretty simple. You know, this iPhone app, and there's a whole training program at the website, and it has, you get the CDs that have all the tones on it, it has the meditation, it has the mantra, it has a whole course in meditation. You don't have to spend $5,000 for, a TM course. All of that is on there, and that's what we put together, and it's there. Now, what you have to do is then learn how to do it with 3 or 4 or 5 people, go out under the stars. Which is why it's really great to come one of these trainings if you can, because you really see it in action, and it's exciting. Everybody understand what we're going to do? Okay. So you want to go through, can we dim the lights in here? And what I want to do is go through some of these images. I'd like to play all of this. This is just a collection of some of the material that we've gotten over the years, and it's sort of like a retrospective from last fall all the way through to 1992. There's a bright spotlight there. I don't know if that's injurious to people's vision. And let's do event selection, and we'll... I do want to play these for you. Those of you who didn't hear it yesterday, these crop circle tones, we'll just play for a moment. We have no sound, it looks like. There we go. And we take a radio transceiver and send these out over radio signals into space while we're doing the meditation and while we're doing the laser. Quite an interesting tone. Okay, let's go to the next. Now, this is actually on the iPhone app, this whole sequence. And it's also in the training program that's online. Okay, so nobody knows how to use the computers, that's the problem. And we go to events. Okay. Now, one of the things I want to show you is this crop circle formation that happened. If you look at the CSETI logo, it's this. We had visualized this to the ETs, and we're going to go in England and do this in a few months in July. And look at this. It's a little washed out. I don't know, the projector's not great. But there it is. And we had sent this form mentally to the ETs, and the next day this was found in a field very near to where we were located. We had been visualizing precisely this formation, and we had been making a triangle in the sky with the circles, and this is what has appeared in this area immediately related to that event. It was astonishing. And that was the same trip where we had a 100-foot diameter disc appear in the field with us, an ET craft. So let's go to this. I want to show, we trained someone on our team who's an artist, actually, and he was doing the CE5 initiatives. And look at this thing that appeared in broad daylight, that he got out of his vehicle and took a picture of it. Again, the resolution is not very good with this projector, but it's crystal clear. And it followed him. And it's interesting because last year from the French government, I got a drawing of a craft identical to this that was drawn by someone who had a close encounter in 1968, I believe, 66 or 68 in France. And that was released by the French Space Agency in Japan after Disclosure Project got them encouraged to do so. Now, this is a classic one that I showed yesterday, but I think a lot of people weren't here. I do want to show it just to give you a sense of what happened. We did a one-day training out on the beach near Pensacola, and these appeared.
Yeah, he went in the same signal. Watch.
Can we turn off these spotlights?
Oh my God! There it goes. 1, 2, 3.
There eventually was 4 that came. Oh, that's better. And they were 30 to 40 foot diameter craft. Very, very close. This is just an old high 8 camera.
We have a confirmed CE5.
And they were signaling to us as we signaled to it.
Look at that star.
Yeah, they're making a triangle.
They were sort of a reddish orange with a sort of blue corona, and they were disc shaped. And
Oh, look, did you see it do that? It's like, look, the top one. They're signaling. They are floating towards us, friends.
we had 2 Air Force pilots with us.
Send them off.
These were silent, moving against a pretty stiff wind.
There are 3 there. I have confirmed that there are 3. Do we?
Got him. I've got him. And look, there's 4. There's 4. There's 4. Holy damn hot shit. Dog. Thank you. All right.
Now, what's interesting about this that isn't captured on film
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
is that as they were approaching, the ETs dematerialized from the craft and appeared in the parking lot as these sort of astral etheric forms. And the people who saw that were so freaked out, there were some women jumped in their pickup truck and roared back to town. And that was very real, and our electronics were going off there as well. Here's an object of a person that we trained was in Santa Fe, and she was doing a contact, inviting them to come, and she felt them and just took her camera, this is the daytime, and took a picture of this object moving very quickly, and outside Santa Fe, New Mexico. Seamless, it has no rivet structures, but it's a sort of a domed disc. Some little things here. It looks like a CCA triangle there. But there's this was moving, they think, at about 500 miles per hour. It's been analyzed very thoroughly. And these sort of things happen to our team members all over the world all the time. And one of the things, I want to show this one because when I decided to move near Thomas Jefferson's home, those of you who don't know, Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, and his home is Monticello near the University of Virginia, and I have a farm there. The day I decided to move there, this appeared in a field 6 years after the one in England, and it's the best crop circle ever in North America, and it's a variation on a theme of the CSETI triangle. which, you know, we could do a whole 5-hour thing on this triangular shape, tetrahedrons, pyramids, sacred geometry. But this appeared in the field of the man who sold us the house that we bought, the farm that we bought, on his family's property. It was the ET saying, welcome. This was on the front page of the local paper, by the way, that crop circle. Now, one of the things that was, let's see. I want to show this picture for a good trans-dimensional one. A couple weeks before we did the National Press Club event, where there were nearly 1 billion people who saw these top secret military peoples at the National Press Club in Washington, we went to Joshua Tree to make contact and to invite the ETs to guide and protect us. And we went to a cave that Raven had found. And as we left, this appeared. This beautiful cobalt blue transit. It wasn't fully materialized. And this is the spirit of Sherry Adamak, who is my dear friend and who helped me start this project in the early 90s. And she was murdered by Majestic. I and she and Congressman Schiff all got metastatic cancer, and Bill Colby was murdered. I'm the only person left living from those early days. And I have a bit of survivor guilt, I guess. But Sherry was there in spirit right above the cave where we had done a puja and meditation for universal peace. What we're doing is just so beautiful. It's beautiful. It will change your life forever. Now at Shasta, a few years ago, about 5 years ago, some tones appeared all around us. And in the tones, very similar to the crop circle tones. And when this came out of, we were in a meditation inviting the ETs to come. Every person who heard it saw in their mental imaging the spheres, a group of spheres moving along that were ET vehicles. And so this was like a Vedic manifestation. With the naked eye, you could see nothing. But in your mental image, you actually saw the craft, and this is the tone that created the image in your mind. This is really amazing technology the ETs have. When we were at Joshua Tree about 2 months ago, we actually had these tones and also the tones from the crop circles that appeared at the site where I did a puja and out in the middle of the national forest. It was amazing. And we have recording of that as well, but it didn't make it into this yet. This is a really amazing thing that came onto my farm. We had a training there a couple years ago in '06, about 5 years ago, 4.5. And this thing came out of space. I'm looking up. This is me. This is Dr. Bravo. And look, and there's an extraterrestrial communication probe that then I actually saw the craft above us. You can see me looking up. And this thing comes in, and then it's there in a trans-dimensional way, and it's a trans-dimensional electronic device that was scanning the group. It was in the center of the group. We're in a circle. And this is what came in, and we've had many of these come in that you can see with your naked eye, but they're very fast. This came in from space. It was like 1/58th of a second. So you got to really, really be awake. Now, one of the things I want to show, because we have a person on our team in Australia, is that often the craft will appear in the ultraviolet range, not visible with the naked eye. She took a photograph of a craft. Her dog actually wanted, and here's this strange object there was a body of water, and this craft appeared. And it has a blue corona around it. She felt it, but she couldn't see it. So she took a picture with her camera, and this is what was in the film. So frequently the ETs will be dematerialized, but they'll be there in an energy form, both their craft and their beings, that will be faster than the speed of what your eyes can see. Because remember, your eyes only see a very narrow range of the visible spectrum, of the electromagnetic spectrum. Now, I want to go to some of these really cool objects at Shasta. Look at this one here. Oops, oh well. We can do this one first. And this is with a night scope. In '08, we got this wonderful, very advanced night vision camera hooked to a digital. And this is when a craft came over that has kindness. This is an ET I was introduced to by Sherry after she died. And this thing, look how huge. these craft come over and will actually send like a blue beam of light into the group. At one point in Wyoming, it lit up the whole field where we were, and this craft came over, materialized, and this blue beam of light came. And it's not just light, it's transformative cosmic energy that has within it all kinds of intelligence and information. Let's go to the next one. Oh, there it is. And this was at this was at the Mount Shasta. Also, this is at Sand Flats when Kindness came in. Look at the size of this, and it's very bright. This is my laser, my green laser, signaling to her. And you know, we go out with a satellite chart so that we rule out satellites and rule out the iridium ones that flare up. And right, a lot of people don't. And this is one when it was after any visible satellites. It came in right by Mount Shasta and signaled to us. Now, while this is going on, frequently there'll be a trans-dimensional object in the field, and you can actually then see an object that will appear very, very, look how bright, it came right in, very close, how big it is. They're beautiful, very celestial. So what's the next set? You guys like these? We're gonna. Okay. Let's go. I want to show. I wanted to show some of these. They're incorrectly called orbs. They're actually craft. This is a mislabel. And I was signaling, and look, boom! Look at this thing. So we remote viewed this craft. You really couldn't see anything, and then all of a sudden, it signals back. And that is not a satellite, or an aircraft, or swamp gas, or Venus, or Superman. Yeah. So this can happen several hundred times a day, a night. Here, look at this that came in right into the field. It's a sea-city triangle. This is a ship that came in at the crossing point of light, right at the edge of the speed of light, and it's actually about 100 feet from our group. After this, there were ET beams. There they are again. Look how close they are. These trees are about 100 feet away or less. So these are the kind of phenomena that you see that we're getting. And when this happens, it's very fast. Afterwards, there'll be this energy field. And we can sometimes be out in the desert where it's 30, 40 degrees. And the ET vehicle will begin to materialize around us transdimensionally. And the temperature will go up to 60, 70 degrees. You have to take your coat off. And look at this right here in front of the tree, how quickly. So these are the trans-dimensional entries of craft that are at the edge of the speed of light. And they're partially materialized in this plasma type of energy. And here's one right in the field. And you actually will see it, it's very close. And when you see something like this and you're in the middle of a wilderness, you go, holy Christ. And then you realize with your inner sight and your subtle celestial vision, these are all around us. Now, one of the things I wanted to share is the Orion transmissions of a couple years ago. We were out in Joshua Tree, and I had initiated contact using this sphere, crystal.
Now they're confirming.
These are the tones coming from the Orion sector.
The master control craft from the deep space.
We're in the middle of an 800,000 national park, no electromagnetic signals, cell phones, nothing, dead. All of our detectors start going off after we make conscious contact. And what we have then are objects that start appearing in the sky and in the air around us that are signaling.
Simultaneously. Now see the craft that is here.
The magnetometers and the other electromagnetic detectors at one point went on a complete lock-on for about 23 minutes without a break. I almost burned them out. These are actually, some of these are quite close. They look like they're far away. They're craft that are dematerialized that then materialize and signal briefly around us. This is Orion's sword and belt, and this is Rigel and
The other
Betelgeuse.
detective. There's two of them.
Is that yet another frequency? Is it
Yeah.
EM?
And of course, the Vedas and the ancient Sanskrit knowledge of the mantras and consciousness came from this
one under
sector.
my chair-
Look at this object, went straight up, not a falling
Speaks
star.
loudly.
Right here,
softly.
the beam right here. You can't hear me.
Oh,
Oh my God.
the book that we just came out with have these on them. There's a DVD that comes with the book. It's called Contact Countdown to Transformation. And it has all of these cases in it up through '09. And the DVD has all these images on it that are through '09, not anything after that. We have to come out with a new one now, because by the time the ink was dry on the printing of that one, we had had so much more contact. It was beautiful. Now, at the last chapter of that book is my translation of the transmissions, because there was actually coded information coming from the Orion sector with these tones. And what I did was go into a state where I could understand it in sort of a binary language, and I spoke it. So that's the last chapter of the book.